The great hall of the Galactic Council was silent. Ambassador Alina Marsh stood alone in the center of the chamber, surrounded by 12 alien species, who had gathered to judge her people. The ceiling stretched so high that she could barely see it, and the walls glowed with soft blue light that made everything feel cold and distant. High Arbiter, Zilkarath floated above his seat, his body made of living crystal that pulsed with light whenever he spoke. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder rolling across an empty plain. The species known as humans are found guilty of crimes against galactic peace. You have developed forbidden technologies without permission. You have taken worlds that were not yours to take. You have used violence against member species of this council. For these crimes, you are hereby exiled from all council space. You have 90 days to remove every human from our territory. Any human found within our borders after that time will be destroyed. Alina did not cry. She did not beg. She had known this moment was coming for months. Ever since the council had summoned her to answer for humanity's supposed crimes, the real crime, she knew, was simply being human. They grew too fast. They learnt too quickly. They asked too many questions and refused to accept their place at the bottom of the galactic order. She bowed her head slightly, turned and walked out of the chamber. Her footsteps echoed against the polished floor, and she felt the eyes of 1,000 alien delegates watching her leave. None of them spoke. None of them objected to the verdict. They were all afraid of what humanity might become, and fear had made them cruel. Captain Daniel Ortiz was waiting for her at the landing pad where their ship, the Horizon's Edge, sat ready for departure. He was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too much sadness in recent years. When he saw Elena's face, he knew immediately what had happened. Complete exile. He asked, complete exile. 90 days. Daniel let out a long breath. 4 billion people, Alina. We have 4 billion people scattered across council space. Colonies, research stations, trading posts. How are we supposed to move them all in 90 days? We will find a way. We always do. The journey back to Earth took 11 days. Alina spent most of that time alone in her quarters, staring out the window at the stars that rushed past. She thought about everything humanity had built since they first reached for the sky. The colonies on distant worlds, the friendships with alien species who had seemed so welcoming at first, the dreams of a future among the stars. All of it was gone now. The council had taken it away with a single vote. When they reached Earth, Lena was taken directly to Geneva, where the United Earth Parliament had called an emergency meeting. Every important leader on the planet was there, waiting to hear what she had to say. Their faces were grim. The room was heavy with fear and anger. Prime Minister Victor Holloway sat at the head of the long table. He was an older man with white hair and a calm voice, but Alina could see the worry in his eyes. "Tell us everything," he said. Alina told them. She explained how the council had listed humanity's crimes, how they had refused to hear any defense, how the vote had been unanimous. She told them about the 90-day deadline and the threat of destruction for any human who remained behind. When she finished, the room fell silent. Admiral Grace Sullivan, commander of Earth's defense forces, was the first to speak. She was a small woman with sharp features and a reputation for being the smartest military mind of her generation. "What are our chances if we fight?" she asked. Elena replied. "The Council has over 2 million warships. We have 300. Even if we fought perfectly, we would only delay them for a few days." The silence returned, heavier than before. Alina could see the despair spreading through the room like a disease. These were the leaders of humanity, the people who were supposed to have answers for every problem. But they had no answers now. Then a quiet voice spoke from the back of the room. "They have made a mistake." Everyone turned to look at Dr. Nathan Cole, director of the Advanced Research Division. He was a thin man with glasses and messy hair, the kind of person who spent more time with computers than with people. He rarely spoke at these meetings, but when he did, people listened. "What kind of mistake?" Victor asked. Nathan stood up and walked to the front of the room. He activated a holographic display that showed a map of the galaxy. Most of it was colored green, showing the territory controlled by the Council. But beyond the edge of the green, in the outer darkness, There was a region marked in red. "This is the Aurelius Expanse," Nathan said. 1,200 star systems, most of them unexplored. The Council species have never bothered with this region because it is too far from the galactic core. It's too dangerous, too poor in the resources they value. But our probes have found something different. He zoomed in on the red region, and new details appeared. Habitable planets. Asteroid fields rich in rare minerals. Vast clouds of exotic matter that could be harvested for energy. The Council thinks they are sending us to die in the darkness. But the darkness is full of possibilities they never imagined. We have the technology to survive there. We have the knowledge to build new homes. And now, thanks to the Council, we have the reason to try. Admiral Sullivan leaned forward, her eyes bright with sudden hope. "You are talking about starting over. Building a new civilization from nothing. I am talking about building something better," Nathan replied. "Something the Council will never expect. It will take decades, maybe centuries. But we can do it. We must do it. Because the alternative is extinction." The room erupted in discussion. Some leaders argued that the plan was impossible, that humanity could not survive in unknown space. Others argued that there was no choice, that staying to fight meant certain death. The debate went on for hours. In the end, they voted to accept Nathan's plan. The Great Exodus would begin immediately. 3 weeks later, Alina stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge and watched Earth grow small in the distance. Behind her ship, a vast fleet stretched across the darkness of space. Every vessel that could fly had been pressed into service. Colony ships, cargo freighters, research vessels, military cruisers. 4 billion people were leaving the only home humanity had ever known. Alina felt tears running down her cheeks. But she did not wipe them away. She was not ashamed to cry. She was watching the end of one era and the beginning of another. "Do you think we will ever come back?" Daniel asked softly. Alina thought about the question for a long time before answering. "Yes," she said finally. "Someday, we will return. And when we do, the Council will learn that they made the greatest mistake in galactic history." The fleet flew on into the darkness, carrying humanity's hopes into the unknown. Behind them, the stars of Council space faded away. Ahead of them lay the Aurelius Expanse, full of dangers and mysteries and possibilities. The exile had begun. But so had something else. Something that would change the galaxy forever. The first years in the Aurelius Expanse were harder than anyone had imagined. The surveys had promised habitable worlds and rich resources, but the reality was far more difficult. Every day brought new problems, new disasters, new reasons to despair. On New Geneva, the world chosen to be humanity's new capital, Governor Linda Patterson worked 18 hours a day trying to keep her people alive. The atmospheric processors broke down constantly. The crops failed because the soil was different from Earth's. Medicine ran short. Food ran short. Hope ran short. Her assistant knocked on her office door one morning with another piece of bad news. "Governor, we lost the cargo ship Atlas last night. It disappeared in the Kessler Corridor." Linda closed her eyes. The Kessler Corridor was a region of unstable space where gravity twisted in unpredictable ways. Ships that entered sometimes came out on the other side. Sometimes they did not come out at all. "How many people?" she asked. 93 crew. Plus 2,000 tons of medical supplies we desperately needed. This was the 11th ship lost in the past year. 93 more names to add to the growing list of the dead. Linda wanted to scream, to cry, to give up, but she could not afford to show weakness. Her people needed her to be strong. "Reroute all traffic around the corridor," she ordered. "I do not care if it adds extra days to every journey. We cannot keep losing people like this." Across the expanse, similar struggles were taking place. On a mining colony called Hadley's Rock, Administrator Samuel Grant faced a different kind of crisis. His workers were losing their minds. It was not madness in the medical sense. It was something quieter and more dangerous. People stopped talking to each other. They stopped caring about their work. They moved through their days like ghosts, doing only what they had to do and nothing more. The light had gone out of their eyes. Samuel understood the problem. These people had left Earth expecting adventure and excitement. Instead, they had found endless tunnels of gray rock and a sky that was always black. They had not seen a real sunset in 3 years. They had not felt wind on their faces or smelled flowers or heard birds singing. They were dying inside, even as their bodies continued to live. One night, Samuel sat with his wife Martha in their small apartment, trying to think of a solution. "They need something to remind them of home," Martha said. "Something to give them hope." Samuel thought about this for a long time. The next morning, he called a meeting of all his engineers. They looked tired and confused when he explained what he wanted them to build. "You want us to build a sunset?" one of them asked. "I want you to build a piece of Earth," Samuel replied. "Something beautiful. Something to remind everyone why we are fighting to survive." It took 3 months, but they did it. In the center of the colony, they built a great dome with a curved ceiling that could display any image. Inside, they created a park with real grass and real trees grown from seeds brought from Earth. And every evening, the ceiling lit up with a perfect simulation of an Earth sunset, complete with orange and pink clouds and the distant sound of birds. The first night, the dome opened. Almost everyone in the colony came to watch. They sat on the grass and stared at the fake sky as colors spread across it like paint on a canvas. Many of them cried. Some laughed. Some just sat in silence, remembering things they thought they had forgotten after that night. Something changed in Hadley's Rock. People started talking again. They started caring again. The dome became the heart of the community. A place where families gathered and children played and old friends remembered the world they had left behind. It was not Earth, but it was enough. Meanwhile, in the research stations orbiting the gas giant they had named Prometheus, Dr. Nathan Cole and his team were working on the technology that would change everything. The breakthrough came from a young physicist named Catherine Bell. She was 26 years old. With red hair and freckles and a mind that saw patterns where others saw only chaos, for 2 years she had been studying the exotic matter that filled the expanse, trying to understand its strange properties. One night she ran an experiment that should not have worked. She was trying to create a small pocket of folded space, a tiny bubble where the normal rules of physics did not apply. The equations said it was impossible. The exotic matter said otherwise. When the experiment finished, Catherine stared at her results for a full minute before she understood what she was looking at. Then she ran to find Nathan, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "I did it," she gasped. "I created a stable wormhole. Just a tiny one, just for a fraction of a second, but I did it." Nathan looked at her data and felt the world shift beneath his feet. A wormhole was a tunnel through space, a shortcut that could connect to distant points instantly. The council species used something similar called hyperspace lanes, but those lanes were fixed and limited. They had been mapped over thousands of years and could not be changed. What Catherine had discovered was different. Her wormholes could be created anywhere, anytime. They could connect any 2 points in the universe. Travel that once took months could now take seconds. "Do you understand what this means?" Catherine asked, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. Nathan understood perfectly. This technology would give humanity an advantage that the Council could never match. They could move ships and supplies and people faster than anyone had ever imagined. They could strike without warning and vanish without trace. They could build an empire in the time it took the Council to react. But there was something even more important. This technology meant hope. It meant that the scattered human colonies could be connected, that families separated by vast distances could see each other again, that humanity could become something more than a collection of struggling settlements in the darkness. Nathan put his hand on Catherine's shoulder. "You may have just saved our species," he said quietly. Over the next 5 years, Catherine's discovery transformed the expanse. Wormhole generators were installed on every ship, and a network of instant travel routes connected every major colony. The isolation that had nearly broken humanity's spirit was replaced by a web of connections that made them stronger than ever. By the 20th year of exile, Humanity had built something remarkable. 114 permanent colonies across 400 star systems, a population of 6 billion people, technology that would have seemed like magic to their ancestors, a new civilization, born in darkness, reaching toward the light. On the anniversary of the Exodus, the leaders of this new civilization gathered on New Geneva to celebrate how far they had come. Prime Minister Victor Holloway, now an old man with white hair and trembling hands, gave a speech that would be remembered for generations. "They cast us out because they feared what we might become," he said. "They were right to fear us. Not because we are dangerous, but because we are unstoppable. We have built a new home in the darkness, and now it is time to build a new future. Today, I am proud to announce the founding of the Terran Ascendancy." The crowd cheered as a banner unfurled behind him, showing a golden phoenix rising from a field of black. It was the symbol of humanity's rebirth, and it would soon be known across the galaxy, far away. In the halls of the Galactic Council, the news arrived through secret channels. High Arbiter Zilka Roth read the reports with growing unease. The humans had not died in the darkness as expected. They had thrived, and they were no longer hiding. The seeds that the Council had tried to bury were growing into something they could not control. 30 years passed, and the Terran Ascendancy grew into something that even its founders could not have imagined. The struggling colonies of the early years had become thriving cities. The desperate refugees had become proud citizens of a new nation. The technology that had seemed like miracles had become part of everyday life. Admiral Grace Sullivan had retired, passing command of the military to a new generation of leaders. Admiral Keith Morrison now commanded the Terran Defense Force, and he had inherited both his predecessor's tactical genius and a fleet that would have made the old Earth navies weep with envy. The Terran fleet had grown to 4,000 warships. Each one was equipped with wormhole drives that could take it anywhere in the galaxy in seconds. Each one carried weapons that used the exotic matter of the expanse in ways the Council species had never discovered. Each one was crewed by men and women who had grown up knowing that their survival depended on being smarter, faster, and more determined than anyone else. Admiral Morrison taught his officers a new way of fighting. "The Council species believe in overwhelming force," he explained at the Naval Academy on New Geneva. "They gather huge fleets and crush their enemies with numbers. We cannot match their numbers, so we will not try. Instead, we will be everywhere and nowhere. We will strike where they do not expect, destroy what they cannot replace, and disappear before they can respond. We will fight like ghosts." This doctrine was tested when the Dravik hegemony, one of the most aggressive Council species, sent a raiding fleet into the neutral zone between Council space and the Expanse. The Dravik commander, a warlord named Thraxel, expected to find weak human colonies that he could plunder and enslave. He had done this to a dozen other species and had never faced any real resistance. He was wrong about the humans. Admiral Morrison was waiting for him with 30 ships. Hidden in the shadow of a dead moon, when the Dravik fleet passed by, wormholes opened behind them, and Terran warships poured through like wolves descending on a flock of sheep. The battle lasted less than an hour. Morrison's ships destroyed the Dravik command vessels in the first minutes, leaving the rest of the fleet confused and leaderless. Then they picked off the enemy ships one by one, never staying in the same place long enough to be targeted. When Dravik reinforcements finally arrived, they found nothing but wreckage floating in the void. 40-7 Dravik ships had been destroyed. The Terrans had lost none. Thraxel himself was captured alive. He expected to be tortured and executed, as he had done to so many of his own prisoners. Instead, he was brought before Prime Minister Catherine Marsh, daughter of the legendary Ambassador Elena Marsh. Catherine was a tall woman with her mother's dark hair and steady gaze. She looked at the Dravik warlord without hatred or fear. "You can spend the rest of your life in a prison cell," she told him. "Or you can carry a message back to your masters. Tell them what you saw here. Tell them that the humans they tried to destroy have become something they cannot defeat. Tell them that if they come for us again, we will come for them." Thraxel chose to be a messenger. When he returned to Council space and described what had happened, the reaction was immediate. The Council convened an emergency session to discuss the human threat. For the first time in centuries, all 12 major species agreed on something. The humans had become too powerful to ignore. But deciding to act against humanity was easier than actually doing it. The Council species had spent thousands of years fighting each other, and their old rivalries did not disappear just because they had a common enemy. The Zithrani blamed the Dravik for provoking the humans. The Dravik blamed the Velkoth for not destroying the human fleet during the Exodus. The arguments went round and round while the humans continued to grow stronger. On the economic front, humanity developed technologies that changed everything. Dr. Catherine Bell, now director of the Advanced Sciences Institute, led the development of zero-point energy extraction. This process could draw virtually unlimited power from the empty space between atoms, providing energy without fuel, without stay, without limit. We are no longer dependent on stars, Catherine announced to the Parliament. We can build colonies on rogue planets drifting between galaxies. We can live in the deepest darkness and still have all the power we need. The Council species are tied to their stars like children tied to their mothers. We are free. This technology allowed humanity to expand into regions that no other species had ever colonized. Settlements appeared on frozen worlds far from any sun, on asteroids floating in empty space, on moons orbiting dead stars. Within a decade, humanity controlled more territory than all 12 Council species combined. The population grew with the territory. By the 50th year of exile, the Terran Ascendancy claimed 15 billion citizens across 2,000 worlds. The generation that remembered Earth was growing old, but their children and grandchildren had built something greater than Earth had ever been. A new culture had emerged, different from anything that had existed before. The Terrans were not simply humans living in space. They were something new, a people forged in exile, tempered by hardship, united by a shared story of survival and triumph. The arts flourished. On the cultural world of New Florence, great murals depicted the Exodus and the founding of the Ascendancy. Musicians created symphonies that blended Earth traditions with influences from the alien species that humanity had encountered. Writers told stories of the darkness and the light, of the Council's cruelty and humanity's determination. Education became central to Terran life. Every child learned the history of the exile, the story of how their ancestors had been cast out by alien masters who feared their potential. They learned to be proud of their heritage while looking toward a future that their ancestors could only have dreamed of. And they learned to never forget the injustice that had been done to them. Prime Minister Catherine Marsh served 3 terms before retiring to write her memoirs. Her successor, Chancellor Raymond Price, was the first Terran leader born after the Exodus. He had never seen Earth, never breathed its air, never walked beneath its blue sky. But he carried its memory in his heart. His inaugural address was broadcast across 2,000 worlds, heard by 15 billion people who hung on every word. My grandmother told me stories about Earth, he said. She described oceans that went on forever, mountains that touched the clouds, forests full of life and color. She told me about a home that was taken from us by those who feared what we might become. He paused, his eyes bright with emotion. I have never seen Earth. I may never see it. But I promise you this, my children will. One day, humanity will return to its birthplace, not as exiles begging for scraps, but as a power that even the Council must respect. One day, we will go home. The crowd roared its approval. Across the Ascendancy, people celebrated a future that seemed brighter than ever before. And in the halls of the Galactic Council, intelligence agents recorded the speech with growing fear. The humans were no longer content to remain in their corner of the darkness. They were preparing for something bigger. They were preparing to reclaim their place among the stars. 75 years had passed since the Exodus, and humanity was ready to make its move. The Terran Ascendancy had grown into the most powerful civilization the galaxy had ever seen. But Chancellor Diana Costa knew that power alone would not be enough. The Council still commanded vast fleets and ancient alliances. A direct war would cost millions of lives on both sides. Diana was a former admiral who had spent her career studying the Council's weaknesses. She understood that the greatest threat to the Council was not humanity, but the Council itself. 12 species that had spent millennia competing for power could not suddenly become true allies just because they shared a common enemy. Their old hatreds ran too deep, their suspicions too strong. "We will not destroy the Council," she told her cabinet. "We will let them destroy themselves. And when they fall, we will be there to build something better." The plan began with friendship. Terran diplomats were sent to the minor species of the galaxy, the ones that had been conquered or exploited or simply ignored by the Council's ruling powers. These species had no love for their masters, but they had never had anywhere else to turn. The Korvathi were the first to accept Terran offers of alliance. They were a small, peaceful species that had been enslaved by the Zethrani for over 300 years. Their homeworld was poor and polluted, their population declining, their culture nearly forgotten. Ambassador Ryan Cooper met with their leader, an elderly diplomat named Vethril, in a ruined temple that had once been the center of Korvathi civilization. The building was crumbling, the artwork faded, the gardens long since turned to dust. It was a monument to everything the Council had taken from them. "Why do you help us?" Vethril asked. His voice was thin and tired. The voice of someone who had spent his whole life fighting for a cause he never expected to win. Ryan thought carefully before answering. "Because we know what it feels like to be judged unworthy by those in power. The Council believes that some species deserve to rule and others deserve to serve. We believe that everyone deserves a chance to reach for the stars." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small device, no larger than his hand. "This is a 0-point generator. It will provide enough power for your entire capital city forever, without fuel or maintenance. It is a gift, with no conditions attached." Vethril stared at the device as if it were a sacred object. For his people, it was. Energy had always been scarce on their world, controlled by the Zethrani used to keep them dependent and weak. This small machine would change everything. "Why?" he asked again, tears forming in his eyes. "Because we believe in a galaxy where no species has to kneel before another. Help us build that galaxy, and your children will grow up free." The Korvathi were the first, but not the last. Over the next decade, 17 minor species quietly aligned themselves with the Terran ascendancy. They did not formally break with the Council, but they shared information, opened secret trade routes, and prepared for the day when the old order would finally fall. At the same time, Terran agents worked within Council space to deepen the divisions between the major powers. They leaked evidence of Zethrani corruption to the Dravik. They exposed Dravik atrocities to the Velkoth. They planted seeds of suspicion and watered them with carefully crafted lies. The Council species turned on each other, each convinced that their rivals were plotting their destruction, and in the shadows. The Terran military prepared for war. Admiral Patricia Kane commanded the first expeditionary fleet, the largest armada ever assembled by humanity. 500 warships trained in the deep black of the outer expanse, far from any Council sensors. They practiced attacks on simulated targets, perfected their coordination, and waited for the order to move. "Our goal is not conquest," Admiral Kane told her captains in their final briefing. "It is liberation. We will strike the Council at its heart, but we will choose our targets carefully. Military bases, not cities. Weapons factories, not schools. We will show the galaxy that the Council's power is built on sand, and we will do it without becoming the monsters they claimed we were." The offensive began on a day that would be remembered forever. 100 wormholes opened simultaneously across Council space, and Terran fleets poured through like water breaking through a dam. The orbital fortress around Valanthos Prime, seat of the Galactic Council itself, fell in 3 hours. The Dravik homeworld's defense grid was disabled before their admirals even knew they were under attack. Key military installations across, a dozen systems were destroyed or captured in the first day of the war. But the most powerful weapon was not the ships or the guns. It was the message that Chancellor Costa broadcast across every channel and every language the moment the attacks began. "People of the galaxy, I speak to you as a friend, not a conqueror. For too long, a handful of species have controlled the fate of billions. They have exiled those they feared, enslaved those they defeated, and exploited those they considered inferior. Today, that system ends. Her image appeared on screens across 1,000 worlds in the homes of species that had never seen a human face before. We do not want to rule the galaxy, we want to free it. Every species has the right to choose its own future. Every people deserves the chance to reach for the stars. The old order promised peace through control. We offer something better, freedom through cooperation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. On 100 worlds, populations rose against their oppressors. The minor species that had secretly aligned with humanity declared their independence openly. Even some council species, tired of endless wars and political games, welcomed the change. The war lasted 3 years. The major council powers fought bitterly, but they fought alone. The alliances that had held for millennia crumbled as species that had once been enemies found common cause against their former masters. The Zethroni surrendered when their homeworld was surrounded by a combined fleet of Terran and Corvathi ships. The Dravok fought until their last warship was destroyed. The Velkoth, always practical, negotiated peace before their losses became too great. On the final day of the war, Chancellor Costa stood in the same council chamber where Alina Marsh had received humanity's sentence of exile 78 years before. The crystalline spires still rose toward the ceiling, but everything else had changed. The Galactic Council is hereby dissolved, she announced. In its place, we establish the Galactic Assembly, where every species will have an equal voice. There will be no more exile. There will be no more slavery. There will be no more injustice written into law. Representatives from over 200 species rose to their feet in applause. Ambassador Vethril was among them, tears streaming down his face as he watched the birth of the new order he had never dared to hope for. In the audience, Ryan Cooper sat beside an elderly woman who had traveled across the galaxy to witness this moment. Alina Marsh was over 100 years old now, her body frail but her mind still sharp. She had been the first to face the Council's judgment. Now she watched as her people delivered their own. "We did it," Ryan whispered. Alina shook her head slowly, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "We started something. Now comes the hard part. Now we have to build something worth keeping." She was right, of course. Victory in war was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, creating a galaxy where the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. But for now, in this moment, humanity had done the impossible. They had returned from exile, changed the galaxy forever. The years after the war were as difficult as any in human history. Winning a war was one thing. Building a new civilization from the ashes of the old was something else entirely. Chancellor Costa retired after the fighting ended, her health broken by years of stress and sleepless nights. Her successor, Chancellor Matthew Gray, was a diplomat who had spent his career building bridges between species that had been enemies for centuries. He understood that the new Galactic Assembly could not succeed through force alone. It needed trust, cooperation, and a vision that went beyond old hatreds. His first act was to relocate the Assembly from Valanthos Prime. It's a newly constructed station orbiting a neutral star. The station was called Unity, and it was built by engineers from 50 different species working side by side. Its design included elements from every major culture in the galaxy, a visible symbol of the cooperation that the new order sought to achieve. The transition was not smooth. Former council species resented their loss of power and influence. Some formed resistance movements that launched attacks against assembly installations and Terran colonies. For a decade, the shadows of the old order threatened to drag the galaxy back into chaos and war. Admiral Patricia Kane, now commander of the Combined Assembly Defense Force, led the effort to end these rebellions. But she refused to repeat the Council's mistakes. "We will not punish entire species for the actions of a few extremists," she ordered her commanders. "We will bring the guilty to justice, but we will offer forgiveness to those willing to embrace the new order. We are not building an empire of fear. We are building a civilization of hope." This approach worked better than many had expected. One by one, resistance movements collapsed as their supporters realized that the new order offered them more than the old one ever had. Former enemies became allies. Old hatreds, while not forgotten, began to fade. Children grew up on worlds where species that had once fought wars now worked together and formed friendships. On Earth, the world that humanity had been forced to abandon nearly a century before, restoration efforts finally began. The cities had crumbled into ruins. The forests had grown wild over the old farmlands. The monuments that had stood for thousands of years had weathered almost beyond recognition, but humans returned, bringing with them the technologies they had developed during their exile. Governor Jennifer Powell, appointed to oversee Earth's restoration, stood on the steps of a ruined building that had once been the center of a great nation and addressed the first wave of returnees. "Our ancestors were forced to leave this world," she said. "They carried its memory across the stars, through generations of darkness. And they never stopped believing that we would one day come home. Today, that dream becomes real." The work of rebuilding Earth took decades. Some argued that the planet should be left as a monument to the past, a reminder of what humanity had lost and how far they had come. But most believed that Earth deserved to live again, to become something new while honoring what had been before. Slowly, the cities rose from the ruins. Forests were carefully restored. Oceans were cleaned of the pollution left by the old industrial age. Animals that had gone extinct were brought back through genetic engineering. After 50 years of work, Earth was green and blue and beautiful once more, by the 100th anniversary of the Exodus. Earth supported a population of 2 billion people, far less than it had held in the old days, but growing steadily. The planet had been designated the cultural capital of the Terran Ascendancy, home to great universities, museums, and monuments that celebrated both human heritage and the new, galactic civilization. The Ascendancy itself had grown beyond anything its founders could have dreamed. 50 billion citizens lived across 5,000 worlds. Its technology had advanced so far that the achievements of the Council era seemed primitive by comparison. Its culture had absorbed influences from 100 species, while remaining distinctly human at its core. But humanity's greatest achievement was not the size of its territory, or the power of its weapons. It was the civilization that it had helped to build. The Galactic Assembly had grown into a true community of peoples. Species that had once made war against each other now worked together on projects that benefited everyone. Trade flowed freely between worlds. Ideas spread without barriers. Children of every species learned about each other's histories and cultures. The old fears and hatreds had not completely disappeared, but they grew weaker with each passing generation. At the centennial celebration on Unity Station, the aged ambassador Ryan Cooper gave the final speech. He had served humanity for 70 years, and his voice was weak, but his words carried across the galaxy. 100 years ago, the Galactic Council exiled humanity to the darkness beyond the stars. They believed they were protecting civilization from a dangerous species. They were wrong about the danger. But they were right that we would change civilization. He paused, looking out at the assembled representatives of 300 species, all gathered to celebrate what they had built together. We changed it by showing that the darkness they feared was actually full of possibilities. We changed it by proving that cooperation is stronger than domination. We changed it by building something greater than any empire of conquest could ever be. The Council thought they were punishing us. In truth, they set us free. And in our freedom, we found the strength to help free everyone else. In the front row, Ambassador Sarah Marsh wiped tears from her eyes. She was the great-granddaughter of Alina Marsh, and she carried her ancestors' name and spirit. But she lived in a galaxy that Alina could never have imagined. After the celebration, Sarah walked to the observation deck and looked out at the stars. Somewhere in that vast darkness lay the Aurelius Expanse, where humanity had rebuilt itself from nothing. Somewhere out there, countless species were living their lives in peace, pursuing their dreams, building their futures without fear. Her communicator beeped. It was a message from the exploration vessel New Horizon, which was mapping the regions beyond the expanse. Ambassador Marsh, we have made contact with a new species. They seem peaceful but cautious. They want to know who we are and what we want. Sarah smiled. She thought about how different this moment was from the first contact humanity had made with the Council species long ago. That meeting had led to fear and judgment and exile. This one could be different. Tell them the truth, she replied. Tell them we are the Terran Ascendancy. We are explorers and builders and dreamers. We are the people who were exiled to the darkness and built a light that now shines across the galaxy, and we would like to be their friends. The message traveled out into the void, carrying the hope of a species that had turned its greatest defeat into its greatest triumph. The Council had been wrong about humanity. They had seen aggression where there was only determination. They had seen danger where there was only potential. They had tried to put out a spark. Instead, they had started a fire that transformed everything it touched. Exiled to the darkness, humanity had built something greater than any empire. Not an empire of conquest and control, but a civilization of possibility and hope. Not a kingdom of fear, but a community of equals. Alina Marsh had watched Earth disappear into the darkness 100 years ago, wondering if her people would survive. Her great-granddaughter now watched new stars being explored, new friendships being formed, new chapters being written in a story that was only beginning. The exile had ended. The future was just starting, and it belonged to everyone.